Such a good mood. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Skirball tapes. This is our last conversation of 2024, and 2024 has, to put it mildly, a difficult year. To our audience, thank you for being here. And the theme of the Skirball tapes, as you know, is radical imaginations. I am really thrilled. I'm really thrilled to welcome Emily Barker. I think she's one of the most compelling artists working today. And I was saying to her earlier, the more I work with her art, the more excited I become about it. Emily, just as a matter of fact, where are you now? Are you in the Northern Hemisphere, the Southern Hemisphere, the West Coast, the East Coast?
I am in Los Angeles, California.
And the sun is shining on you?
It is very sunny outside. Usually I go out and sit in this little patch of type of cover, ground cover that I lay on. But this morning I was prepping, so I haven't. I'll go do that after our talk.
Okay. Well, I hope the sun will continue to shine on you.
Oh, it will. That's one thing I can depend on here.
Okay. Okay, Ellen and I are going to talk for 45 to 50 minutes. We're leaving time for questions. And as usual, put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then we will select them and pull them up in chat. And I will ask, and Emily will give one of her beautiful answers. We have a hard stop in 1 hour, as is our wont. So let's get going. Emily, thank you again for being here. You're a leader in what is called disability art. You're a leader because of your grit, your energies, and your great talent. And you focus on lived realities, material realities. I had 2 initial questions, if you don't mind. Now, you were born in 1992 in California, right?
Yes.
I have read that you grew up in Georgia. I've
Correct.
also read you grew up in Chicago. Where did you, Emily, where did you grow up? If you tell me Oklahoma or Alaska or...
That's all basically correct. When I was 17, I moved to Chicago to go to school at the School of the Art Institute, the museum school there. And a lot of people just assume I'm from Chicago without asking. And articles online about me are not necessarily accurate because the people writing them do not care to double check or consult with me about what they're publishing. So,
well, I am going to assume that everything we say here today, including how great you are, is reliable. Then when you were 17, I want to dwell on what happens next, but many people know what happened when you were 17, but not all. So you were in a terrible accident.
well, that was at 19. So
That was 19,
I had, yeah, I was very much, as I call it, ambulatory throughout Chicago and going to school with working, not a spinal cord injury, an autoimmune disease at that point.
And you spent 2 years in a hospital bed?
Actually, I only, well, all the time I've spent in a hospital bed adds up to over 2 years, but I was hospitalized for 6 months, and on and off, I was in and out of the hospital the next few years consistently until about 3 years ago. I was in and out of a hospital bed. So,
and this is both the consequences of the accident and your terrible autoimmune disease, right?
I actually found out I have underlying Lyme. So I believe that a lot of the complications also had to do with undiagnosed autoimmune diseases that I had before the accident that caused loads of complications from the accident, from the surgeries that I had due to the accident, and also caused the CRPS, because once you get one autoimmune disease, they start stacking. So then you get like MCAS, POTS, like you'll just start getting all of these things because your immune system is dysregulated. And so due to the environmental toxins in the US, due to global warming and ticks becoming a huge problem everywhere in the US, we will see more and more autoimmune diseases from, not being able to get microplastics out of water and all of these different things that my grandparents' generation didn't have to deal with, and their bodies didn't have to process. So when you're raised on chicken nuggets and Pop-Tarts, get ready for some serious health problems in your future.
I know that climate change you take with great and legitimate urgency, but this experience of where things just seem to, the challenges to your body just seem to pile up like many viruses attacking at once. What happened to your art? Didn't you think when you went to the Art Institute that you were going to be an oil painter? And then what happened?
I still do oil painting, and I just did frescoes for the first time this summer. I learned how to fresco at Skowhegan, the very prestigious residency in Maine. And I was a very serious child and young adult, and I was a very serious, classically trained oil painter. And I got into advanced painting, which was, as the youngest person to get into advanced painting that year. So I would have been in advanced painting my junior year, which was not really heard of. It was more of a senior year sort of thing. And due to my accident and the way that my consciousness, it kind of was almost like a spiritual awakening. I could no longer make work from the consciousness of the very bookish, nerdy, very tall, active, constantly working, constantly in the studio. I nannied at the time of I always had jobs from 15 on. I had various restaurant jobs or nannying jobs. And I also did oil painting after that, just for myself. But when you experience the horrors of the American healthcare system, and then you experience the horrors of the austerity system in the US and the bureaucracy, the punitive bureaucracy towards disabled people, where if you become disabled before you paid enough taxes to get on actual disability, you for your whole lifetime do not qualify to live on anything but a poverty stipend from the government. So any person who didn't pay into the social security system, so any disabled child, we get a fraction of what anyone could live off of in the US. And it's a very punitive system. I just posted today that there's caps on the income, and you're not allowed to earn any money. So there are caps on severely disabled people, but there are not caps on billionaires. And I find this really interesting that we spend millions of dollars applying a carceral logic towards high needs disabled people that have some of the most expensive bodies and needs to take care of. And we don't apply any sort of income caps to billionaires. So
it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yes, now, as I understand it, we can come back to this because it is a catch-22 made out of bear traps. You can get X amount, but you can't earn, or you can't have, what is the limit on gifts you can get per month? $65, something like that?
Yes. Yeah.
So you have this, and then do you get with this payment, which is under $1,000, right?
It went from, when I first was disabled, they denied me twice, even though I was at that point completely immobile. So They denied me twice. I had to fight for SSI, and the payment was $700 a month in Georgia. Then it moved to $740 in Chicago, and you're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to earn any income to supplement that. So that means that you can't get acupuncture, you can't repair your wheelchair, you can't replace the brakes on your car. So you can't pay a security deposit for an apartment. And right now it's like $900. It increased in California, but that doesn't pay for rent anywhere, even with roommates. And you can't really live with what I found having multiple diseases. You're not a good roommate, and the ableism that you deal with where people are just not thinking is super exhausting to have to educate people within your home environment. So I would like to live alone. So that's what I'm trying to work towards.
No, Emily, I'm in a previous life, I was an English professor. So I can't help but ask the question of language here. And I know you're so conversant with the question of language. You use disability and ableness, you use abnormal and normal. Do you use a variety of vocabularies, or do you have one or two words that you find appropriate for a wide range of conditions?
When I reread things I've written, and ask other people to read them, I've realized that I have a completely different vocabulary and language to discuss the built environment, the experience of disability, the experience of being, because I don't really think anyone is even able-bodied at this point. Everyone is poisoned with, but at the same time, I want to say that while also stressing that we need to center those with the most needs and severely disabled people who require a lot of care and assistance to exist, because a lot of this language gets appropriated by those who it was not meant for, in order to, like, center themselves in discussions where they shouldn't be centered. And this happens all the time. So I have a variety of words for a variety of different reasons, and have come up with my own language nearly, but it's also a language based and steeped in disability studies. So it's not something that we are, as a society, are very well versed in a lot of these different terms. So please ask me if you need clarification I used ambulatory a lot because I don't think the term disability or disabled is relevant anymore or works, because I really see everyone, and a lot of people who consider themselves able-bodied or able to be physically and mentally disabled, and they don't see themselves that way, even as they're struggling to, as they're getting dialysis and different, it's a very personalized definition.
Well, that's interesting. And I'm glad that you fought against the current grade. And I'm also very glad you mentioned disability studies that emerged just before you were born. I mean, they emerged in the 1980s and are very important across the disciplines. As you talk, I realize that there are two of your artworks I would like to have us look at, because they seem to me relevant to what we're saying now. And then I'd love to go on to your sense of yourself as a systems analyst. But one, if George wouldn't mind, if you could pull up, Emily, if you could discuss it with us a bit, when pain is not a metaphor, because I think you're getting at something, and correctly, this is your work. I'm just,
yes,
that pain is pain. And we can't say to use pain as a metaphor disguises the real meaning of pain. So would you talk about this a little tiny bit?
I'm wearing the hat in there right now, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of, right now we're seeing these trends in the art world and art making, especially with painters and stuff, and all of where the language I try to use to explain a disease where or getting a spinal cord, injury and having 7 spine surgeries in which regular anesthesia doesn't work on me. I have a rebound sympathetic nervous system, so the all of the surgeries that I've had, none of the pain medication they gave me or the anesthesia would work very well. So I would wake up during surgeries, but I live with the most painful disease in existence. And I haven't even had the bandwidth or the emotional capacity to make a lot of work about living with this disease for the past 12 years because language is so appropriated. And when you're trying to just explain something in layman's terms and talk about what it's like to have a disease that can shut down your organs, that can kill you, and that makes it feel like your feet are going through a meat grinder. Last night I was cleaning the kitchen and yelping because the flare was so bad, but the kitchen has to be clean for the new roommates coming to be here. And all of this work that you see that I've made in extreme amounts of physical pain due to a neurological disease that is caused from environmental stressors and underlying things like Lyme that just are not taken seriously or treated well, and due to nerve damage from our very not thoughtful surgical approaches in the US. So if the surgeons during my accident had used ketamine as an anesthetic while operating on me, I wouldn't have developed the disease that I have.
What is its name again?
It's chronic regional pain syndrome. It's CRPS, and it's kind of like a disease that when you have a bunch of underlying factors and a lot of different stressors on your body. I was drinking a lot of alcohol in college and eating poorly, and then the accident happened. So my body didn't have the trauma of the severity of the accident makes your nervous system start getting attacked by your immune system. And it basically is kind of like it's like MS or it's more like ALS with pain, the way that it operates. So it's a very rare disease. People are talking about it more and more. But it affects every aspect of your life, your memory, your cognition, your energy levels, and to try and exist and survive all of the things that we have to survive every day and afford life while feeling like you're being tortured is a really intense experience. Yeah. And I have friends with the disease and they think that I'm like some kind of there are ways to get it in remission that are very expensive and very painful and very difficult, but I think I'm more and more wanting to talk about it because none of my work was made from comfort. All of it was made while I was in an immense amount of physical pain.
But pain is not a metaphor.
Right.
These are the lived realities. There's another one well, I like so much of what you do, but there was something else I hope we could talk about. And one thing that I've learned to appreciate about you is this quite deep sense of humor you have. Not humor in the sense of ha ha ha, not bro humor, but
I have a good amount of bro humor too. It's very, very
I don't think that. I guess I'm just not a bro here.
If we hung out long enough, you'd be like, okay, I see it. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that. I look forward to learning a new vocabulary of bro humor for my feminist self. But there's one, good medicine is bitter to the mouth. Now, wasn't this a new genre you're going? This is porcelain, isn't it?
Yes, they're porcelain tiles, and they're laser etched, how you would do any sort of plaque or memorial. And it's a piece showing the interconnectedness of everything. So the ways in which, Trump mocking a disabled reporter, and how no one really cared about that, can lead to the policy where Gracia Figueroa died because airlines totaled her wheelchair, and there's no laws maintaining that if a airline totals your wheelchair, you'll have the equipment you need immediately to not get a pressure sore. I just had a pressure sore this winter where I was on my stomach for a month, and they're extremely debilitating, but they're very serious. So you are completely immobilized while you have one, and she didn't have the right equipment or seat in order to prevent her from getting a pressure sore. And these sort of things are not talked about, or
well, you talk about them through your, and when I was seeing this in a larger framework so I could see, I think, is that the one where there's a Kardashian in a wheelchair saying, "Isn't this fun?" Something like that.
Yes. So that's kind of pointing to, there's this new, well, not new, but for a while, for the past decade, in art and in entertainment, there's this concept. People really want to argue semantics on all of these things, but a few years ago, it was considered cripping up. So it's the way in which mobility devices are used as props for able-bodied people to be edgy. Or she was on the cover of a magazine in a gold wheelchair.
What is the term cripping up?
It'll probably change. Yeah, it'll probably. What did you hear? What's it called to your?
I find it obscene.
It is, and it happens all the time. It's really and it's weird because it's people that I know. Like, there's a model that I was friends with, and she's only known me in a wheelchair, who recently had a music video, I'm not going to name her name, where she's all wrapped up in gauze in a wheelchair. And I just had friends open up a space, or people I thought were friends open up a space yesterday to inaccessible it's, I can't, yeah, it's just very insensitive, but it's also, people are literally profiting off of able-bodied models being in wheelchairs for the shock value of it. And
it's like going to, no, I have registered my really agonizing discomfort with that kind of appropriation.
It happens all the time. Capitalism just absorbs whatever to sell things. So it's a very common phenomenon that, I've seen I've seen thousands of images of dismembered children over the past few years, and then to see, Charlie XCX on her album cover with her arm off. It happens all the time. This pop culture is obsessed with is obsessed with violence, but also fake images of violence that they don't experience in order to capitalize off of the shock value. And I think, yeah.
I hear this, and this goes back to what we were just looking at, which is pain is not a metaphor, and pain is not to be appropriated. But I wanted to, because you talk about yourself as a systems analyst, and almost and this is, I think, part of your realism. There's a wonderful quote, when I came across it, of yours. I wrote it down. You said, when you face death, as you did, when you face death, you cannot dilly-dally. And that phrase, you cannot, but there are other ways of putting it, you cannot fool around. You must go straight to the point. And you say also, my work does not stem from inspiration. None of this romantic, I was walking out and I saw a cloud, but from systems analysis and recognizing deep flaws within things. Now, as I was looking at your work, you've got to get a show, a whole show, not just to go to the Whitney to see you, but get a whole show so everyone can see this. But three systems. Tell me if I'm right about you. One is healthcare and medicine. The next is the built environment and architecture. And the next is the economics of survival. What we were talking about, trying to live on SSI that won't pay for. So to start with healthcare and medicine, capitalism, you say, is a greater threat than ableism, the greater threat. And another one of your absolutely canonical works is called Land of the Free, which I take it is just a little tiny bit sarcastic.
Yeah, I mean, I could do a whole book of works with this title, and images.
Do you want to explain it for people who, again, I'm not sure that all of our viewers can see it, but do you want to describe what this, it just looks like a piece of paper within a nice white frame, hospital white. Do you want to describe it a little bit? I mean, it's, as I say, it's a now canonical work.
Yes, so this was exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art in Frankfurt in a show called Crip Time a few years ago, and it was also exhibited in my solo show at Carly Packer Gallery in LA. It was also exhibited in my, so it's a newer one. It wasn't in the first solo show, but this is a medical bill that I received less than a month after becoming completely paralyzed. At that point, I could not move anything chest down. I was unable to even transfer independently from the hospital bed to my wheelchair. I had just undergone multiple spine surgeries, foot surgeries, and I received this bill that a few months later, that while I was still in the hospital, for $500,000, so $506,088.35 for the admission date of July 9th, 2012, just through July 31st, 2012. So those, less than a month in the hospital, and this wasn't a complete bill. This was the amount I owed personally as a 20-year-old. Now, like, I turned from 19 on the 13th of July to 20. And this was the amount I owed after the insurance company that my father had through the government paid out premiums on my account. So this is what I owed, even with some of the best US health insurance, which was Blue Cross Blue Shield at the time, that my father was getting from his job that I still could be on because I was under 26 years old, which I no longer can be on. So that was when I say that it wasn't traumatic, my accident, as much as, opening up this bill, or the inadequate medical care, or the medical neglect, or the inability to receive treatment, or the laziness of doctors and healthcare providers with doing tests and doing blood work. Once you become disabled, once you become paralyzed in the US, your body and your life is seen as less than, and it's very difficult to receive medical care, but also everything is exorbitantly expensive into realms that I can't even conceive of. So that was just the first hospitalization. That did not account for the next few months that I spent at RIC, which was a rehab center for me to be able to live in a wheelchair, and the Shepherd Center in Atlanta. And the total for that year out of pocket that I owed was over $1 million. So this idea that Americans are free, well, we're not free for many reasons. And it's not just disabled people that can't afford to exist. It's my aunt and my dad, who's a conservative and a Republican, told me that he would have to be retiring in Mexico because he can't afford to retire in the US. And I find this extremely ironic. Yesterday, I spoke to my aunt on the phone who can barely afford groceries and gas, even though she's worked her whole life in a healthcare, in a medical clinic, and worked every single day of her life. So it's, when I say that this isn't just about disability, it's about that the current systems that exist are not sustainable for really, 99.9% of people. So what are we going to do about it?
So what did you say that in one of your, that 600,000 people in the US go bankrupt each year because of medical debt?
Yes, over 600,000 go bankrupt. Thankfully, I didn't own anything, so they couldn't take anything from me. And I still apply this now, is that, like, if you don't own anything, they can't take anything from you. But if I owned a house, they could take away my house. If I owned a car, they could take away my car. It's really, it's a really deadly system. I mean, there's 650,000 homeless people now in LA, and everyone is like, oh, it's drugs. I'm like, no, if you become disabled in the US, I've been homeless multiple times simply because you can't afford to live anywhere for $700, $800, $900 when you don't have a security deposit, and you need a place that's wheelchair accessible and where people are nice enough to live with you when you're chronically ill and disabled, which is very hard to come by. Even in 12 years, I have not found that, where people want to have grace and do community care or support their roommate in any way. Like, I've never lived with people that are anything but, it's very, very stressful. And we have this illusion of freedom, and we're not, I'm scared to say a lot of things and do a lot of things, and a lot of institutions and universities in the US are doing militarized policing on their students for protesting. And I think there's a million reasons why Americans are not free.
Can we, the two other things we're talking about, this combination of medical care and economics, and there's so much else in your work about this. But there were two things I'd love it if we could look at. One is something I need help understanding. It's a big installation piece you did called Illusions of Care, and then to be followed by something you mentioned before, Pressure Sores, an installation. So this is called Illusions of Care. You also talk about what is it like to be a dependent. You have to have caregiving, nearly everything. First time I met you, I saw how independent you were, but at the same time, the dependency that you neither liked nor particularly enjoyed for the most part. But what is this very, very interesting sculpture called Illusions of Care, and what is it made out of? Because I want to talk about that, because we're going to get to another iconic piece where you use what is this material?
This is a lot of so going back to the pain is not a metaphor, that piece is simply about the amount of things that you need to have if you're disabled or if you're in pain in order to function. So red light therapy, magnesium salt baths, expensive cushions, reading materials on the nervous system, all of these different medical devices, heart rate monitors, just thousands of medications. And there's this concept in the US particularly, or in general, this sort of bizarre assumption that people with that a lot of disabled people who don't have mobility disabilities also contribute to this myth that that disabled people with high needs are taken care of and have the care that they need in the US, when the reality is that disabled people every year, hundreds are killed by their caregivers, and that's not including the amount that die in hospitals from medical neglect because their lives aren't seen as valuable. Like, I will not go to the hospital anymore for anything, especially after COVID. And I've seen lots of videos of women trying to get medical treatment in the US who aren't in wheelchairs but are disabled and being denied that care and end up dying. And so this piece is about this concept that we live in a caring and generous society that takes care of the most vulnerable in our population, and that's not true. These systems work in the opposite and are actually really deadly. If you're not born with an immense amount of wealth inherited as a disabled person, and you don't have parents who can afford to take care of these needs, you will be struggling immensely to receive adequate medical care and caregiving via the state. And it is an incredible fight, very draining, makes you sicker. And then when you do receive that care, like I've been waiting for weeks to get a call back to get biopsies, and I can't even receive medical care with Medi-Cal health insurance in the US that's adequate at all. I've never been able to receive treatment covered by health insurance for my rare diseases. They just do not, all the systems that we think exist to care for us in a time of crisis, if they don't exist. They actually work the opposite and it's eugenics. We live in a eugenics program. So the piece is a memorial to all of the disabled people who have died by neglect or have died by filicide, which is caregiver abuse. So the piece is just a confrontation to bureaucracy and society.
I have to say, I come from a medical family, and I think I've been very lucky because I have known the good doctors and the good nurses. And I appreciate being able to place my own awareness of the good doctors and the good nurses within these lived realities. The pressure sores was the next one. What happened, George? Could you do pressure sores? This is what you were referring to earlier. These are these lovely little rectangles. Looks like a little design for a curtain or a cushion. These are on your wheelchair. Is that what, am I correct in interpreting that?
Yeah, these are NASA designed cushions for pressure sores, and they're
NASA design.
Yes, NASA designed these cushions due to Christopher Reeves died of a pressure sore, and his foundation has put a lot of funding into medical devices for the severely disabled. But pressure sores, as well as getting hit by cars, and I think urinary tract infections or kidney infections are some of the highest causes of death for disabled people. And these cushions are very fragile and pop very easily. And I've popped like probably 12, but they make you return them in order to get a replacement. So
Emily, what do you mean they pop? They just disintegrate?
No, they don't disintegrate. They just pop. They're air cushions. So they're these little chambers filled with air, kind of like, yeah, they're air cushions. So they pop super easy if they get too hot, if they go, there's actually, I've never been able to figure out how to not pop them. They just are very fragile, and I've, due to how expensive they are, they're like $500, $600 each. It was so stressful having when these would pop, and I was extremely broke, and I couldn't, there's nowhere you can go to just like, it was terrifying. These would pop and I would be immobile, unable to use my wheelchair, having to stay on my stomach, getting pressure sores. And there are so many other ways in which you're immobilized and helpless when you rely on these expensive devices that you can't just go out to the store and buy, and that are so expensive that you can't just replace easily.
I don't, Emily, it just was pain I pass on to the systems of the lived realities of the health and economics, and then also working with the built environment. And one thing that's intriguing well, one thing that in your art that I appreciate is the sculptures and installations you've made about the built environment externally, and the sculptures you've made about the built environment internally. And I was wondering if we could just look at two things about the built environment that when you go out into the sunshine of LA, the built environment out there, and then one thing which has become another canonical piece about the built environment internally. So if we could look at first rug and then built to scale. I don't know, I'm very fond of rug. I don't know why, because it's horrifying. Well, what I thought you were trying to do here, Emily, was you were trying to do a composite of the terrain a wheelchair had to navigate. Is that it?
Yeah, so I wove this with my friends while we were watching TV. It was definitely a community like weaving practice. We would sit there and run these tubes and copper wiring to signify the electrical systems of the body. But and it's IV tubing. But I wanted to create just a temporary situation where someone who can walk has to struggle to navigate, has the same difficulty navigating a rug as I do with rugs. I can't, when I travel for work, I really struggle to find hotels that don't have rugs, because being in a manual wheelchair, a lot of people assume it's easy to push a manual wheelchair. It is not. My shoulders, my neck is wrecked from just using the ramp outside, from just trying to get down my driveway. Manual wheelchairs that aren't electric are extremely difficult to use. And so this, when you walk on it, it basically trips you up if you're trying to walk on it, because it's really tall. Like it looks small. The rug looks really small, but it's like 5 feet by, it's a big piece, and it's this tall. So I was trying.
What is this nasty little thing there?
I just put a dog bag in it because and there's some headphones in it. It's kind of my experience of trying to walk my dogs and navigate LA, but also just the systems of the body and the systems of an organic, like we are organic beings, and we like to forget that we're not just electrical wiring and blood vessels, we're flesh. So it's just a piece of me. I always have dog bags in my pocket. I have 2 dogs, and it's just kind of an experience of me trying to navigate the world and trying to impart that sort of forced perspective onto others. And a lot of my work uses plastic, because single-use plastics are a big part of disability, and we need to, and I think plastic in general is the material of our time. Acrylic paint is plastic. It didn't exist a few decades ago, and now it's in the living organisms of every creature on the planet, which is super disturbing. Companies could have just made plastics that were hard plastics that didn't disintegrate and end up in our water system, but instead, due to polyester fabrics and water bottles, we now are consuming credit cards of plastic every month, and it's completely ruining our endocrine system, our lymphatic system. It is a carcinogen, and I'm particularly interested in using this vacuum formed plastic in the IV tubing because I think it's the material of our time. And it started with my obsession with this Lee Bonteque fish piece, where she made a little fish out of plastic that's beautiful. And you know, just looking at it, you automatically think about the amount of plastic waste that our ocean is having to deal with, and just sort of the irresponsibility of human beings to create this world in which I can't even find a water purifier that doesn't have some sort of plastic particle in it, or a water filter that can get rid of microplastics. And so I'm boiling my water every day and filtering it through different filters so that I can heal my own chronic illnesses. And yeah, we're not free. We're living in horrors beyond human comprehension,
Well,
you know, and it's not,
but Emily, your art helps to bring us back to human comprehension. This is when people see your art. It may seem beyond human comprehension, but surely the art comes back. Look, for example, built to scale. Just three little things, and then I am getting. I have so much I want you to say. I'm getting a little tiny bit. People, please start putting your questions in. I've got a couple more really extraordinary sculptures to go through, but start putting your questions in. And Emily, why did we make the Skirball tapes only 60 minutes? Shame on us. These are three separate items, aren't they?
these are just two separate items. So this is oh well, the grabbers, yeah. So those are casted copper grabbers, and I want to make more of those. Will be in my next show. I just have to have a grabber in every room, and I would prefer if we just designed space that was more thoughtful for everyone involved, short people, children. It would be lovely if we just could have a more universally designed space. And then this piece is called Ramps, and it's some broken wheelchair frames, because wheelchairs, the way that they make them, are really bulky, are really outdated, are very fragile. They're very, very, very fragile, and they get totaled. I've had a wheelchair totaled every few months by an airline for the past few years, and it takes 6 months for them to replace those wheelchairs. And the built environment destroys wheelchairs. So the messed up sidewalks in LA, the massive curbs that are a foot tall that I have to jump to avoid the puddle where the ramps are. It's, if there's a ramp, this piece is talking about how ramps are not accessibility solution. Ramps work well if you have an electric powered wheelchair, but if you have a manual wheelchair, they are devastating. They, my shoulders and my neck and my back are destroyed because of inclines and having to navigate ramps that are too steep. And so this piece is just talking about how it's just, ramps are not an accessibility solution. We need to start designing things in a way that is smart and not lazy. Ramps are a part of lazy design, where engineers come in and add a horribly slow lift that breaks down all the time, or like a bunch of elevators. It's just, disabled people should be designing space because it's more pleasant to interact with for everyone. Moms with strollers, elderly people, people with walkers. It's not just for wheelchair users. It's not a narcissistic thing to make the world for everyone, and because it benefits everyone.
You know, Emily, the next work of art, piece of art, which I said is becoming canonical and was in the Whitney Biennial. We talked about built spaces externally and then domestically. And this is kitchen. This is your kitchen, made again out of this particular material is something that you can't lift over 10 pounds or 20 pounds. Which one was it?
I can't lift over a gallon, so like 20 pounds. And I shouldn't lift anything off the ground. But I break that rule all the time. I'm kind of scared, but yeah.
Oh, you would. Anyway, kitchen, as I understand it, you like to cook. You're a
I
good
love
cook.
cooking. Yeah.
And you have, it's hard to navigate the ordinary kitchen. Now, as I understand it, you design kitchen and tell me if I'm right or wrong and help me with the details. You designed a kitchen to scale. So if I were to walk into your kitchen, this art installation, it is so much bigger than the ordinary kitchen that I would understand or begin to understand in my klutzy way what it is like to be a disabled person in an ordinary kitchen. Do I have that right?
Correct. Yes.
So tell me, what is this little row of things? Are those cupboards?
Yeah, so the design of the piece is inspired by my mom's a woodworker and builds cabinetry, and we had to come up with yeah, their bottom cupboards and shelves and their top shelves. But when you're building something that just needs to represent an idea, I wanted there to be a certain dimensionality, but also it had to I basically just thought that those flat pieces where it was just a drawer were a little weren't as multidimensional as I would like them. So I just wanted I think it's important. I'm really a kind of classicist. I'm really over, like, the world is ugly enough. We don't need more ugly art. Like, we don't need to look at more ugly things. You can convey an idea or an experience in a beautiful way. The world is terribly ugly, especially in America, with mass reproduction of the same, you know, 7-Eleven, McDonald's, blah, 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 the same built environment in the US. It's a horror show. So I just wanted to make a representation of a kitchen that wasn't an IKEA kitchen and that was more visually pleasing for me to look at because I have to build it. But each of these panels are super lightweight and you can see through them. So it's a kitchen that's supposed to haunt you. It's not, it's like if a kitchen died and it haunts everyone. That's what it's supposed to look like. A lot of this is about hauntology of space and of capitalism and of the built environment, and how, you know, I could do this piece with a bar, but the way that you would walk through and experience this kitchen, it's not just how I experience the kitchen, it's how I experience the whole world. It's how the whole world infantilizes disabled people and pushes them aside and says, you know, you're a burden, please get away. And it's like, well, actually your way of thinking is a burden on the rest of society, because there are short people. Like, the average countertop height was designed for men. So all of their tiny wives cooking for the whole family have these little step stools to use these massive kitchen countertops. It's nonsense. Like, it's just completely absurd that countertops were not designed for the people working in the kitchen or making the food, which tends to be short women. So it's a kind of feminist piece as well, because no, it just doesn't. My dad's not cooking. My dad came into my RV where the countertop height is 32 inches, only 2 inches lower than the standard reproduction of a countertop. And I was like, and his arms are really long. and we have a very strange relationship. He had no problem using my countertops. When you're taller, your arms get longer, so it's not like he was struggling to use. He can accommodate for that space easier than I can accommodate for the kitchen counters I'm looking at right now in a regular space, where I burn my arms and burn my legs and burn my face because the stove is right at my face level and the oil is splashing onto my face. So it's kind of a, it's hilarious, but it's exhausting. And so I wanted to create that sort of, I wanted to make ambulatory people feel helpless in space and understand what it's like to try and navigate everything emotionally, and not just with a kitchen, but with bureaucracy, with austerity, with dealing with ableism in institutions, dealing with being exploited. And I've been an artist now for over a decade. I have no security or healthcare or any way of getting the medical treatment I need, the way of having, I'm nowhere near like anything that people take for granted every day, basically.
The one thing that I hear you say is, these are my lived realities, but they try to understand them. And you say in a non-threatening way, someday they might be yours. Have the imagination of thinking they might be yours, not in this kind of yeah of tripping up, but they might be yours in your flesh. Now, we have questions waiting. So I just want, in the things I was going to ask, and maybe you'll come back next year, Emily. The double precarity of artists and disabilities. Your work is a model and trying to show the fashion industry its underpinnings, as it were. We didn't have time, maybe it's in the questions. The current election, what effect might that have on disabilities? And I'm using that in the broadest sense of the word. And also, when we talk about, you avoid personal intimacies. There's none of this, oh, I love you, blah, blah, blah. You're very strict as a formal analyst. And I say that in a good sense of the word. But there are points you were making about, you talk about the infantilization of the disabled, and that surely both in a large binary sense matters to the way in which women are treated. And we didn't have time to go into the American Disabilities Act that was passed 2 years before you were born. And it's been just, so all these questions are looming out. So cross your heart, you'll come back next year and say, before we go to the questions, I loved one thing you said about art, and we've just put it up. And George, can read the quote. Can you read it, Emily? It's your quotation about art.
The best art asks questions and interrogates belief systems. It confronts you with a reality that you haven't considered, or with the artist's own consciousness.
Thank you for the realities and for the consciousness. And now, let me go. We're close to the limit. So we're going to have one question, one quick question and one quick answer, because I think I've gotten a promise for you to return, right?
Sure.
Okay. Now let me go. Where am I here? Nicholas Silva. How can we all get into disability policy and activism at the federal level as low-income disabled people or artists? And what are the top policy and community care priorities? And 61 minutes for this? I see you again.
I'm just trying to put we are a lot of people with disabled children voted for a system, and we have systems in place that completely eviscerate the current, what little care that we do have that we need to survive. And so I'm just trying to confront people with the reality that, and my work, you know, there's millions of wheelchair users. I'm not some unique experience. There, 1 in 4 people are disabled. There are millions of wheelchair users, and there are millions of people with autoimmune diseases that are ambulatory wheelchair users and who have, but I am not a policymaker or in, I am not in electoral politics in the US. And I used to do a lot of organizing and had a podcast on policy. And right now, it's very clear to me that if we don't solve climate change, none of this will really matter, because our towns and communities will be wiped off the map and people will be mass disabled. So I suggest people read The Right to Maim and get involved in a local way with local with their community. And I think that they should help their neighbor, because I don't know how to answer that question. That's not my, I'm just a I'm mainly a construction worker by day, trying to get a kitchen I can use built, and I've until that happens, I won't be as involved as I used to be in American in these sorts of things. So I would Google that and find someone better to ask, because I can't do it all, and our expectation of marginalized people who have the most needs to also solve the problems that they're facing is a very problematic way of existing in the world. It's like the marginalized people who are faced with, like the girls who are being forced to give birth now that they don't have abortion rights in the South, are not the people you should be asking how to change the systems that are causing them to die from ectopic pregnancies at 14. You know, it's like, you're asking the wrong people. This should, able-bodied people who have privilege should be the ones solving these things for the most marginalized in our communities, because the most marginalized are exhausted with attempting to survive these systems and we can't get our head above water. If so, they're yeah. I know Nico, and I appreciate the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good answer. And I think those of us who are able-bodied have the privilege of luck to be able-bodied at this point in time. But to take on the work that Nicholas asks about, but to do it with humility. So I would say to none of this cripping up stuff. I mean, pain is not a metaphor. And to you, Emily Barker, and your radical imagination, and your grit, and your transformation of your lived realities into art. Don't stop doing your art, because the best art does ask questions and interrogates belief systems. And also something we didn't talk about enough, but you do talk about: beauty. Beauty. That you do not, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of your lived realities, you still do have an apprehension of beauty. And that may be, given the world you describe, one of the greatest acts of a radical imagination. So thank you. I'm glad I extracted that promise with other artworks. And take care when you go out into the sunshine. May it shine upon you. Thank you so much, Emily. Nicholas, thank you for the questions and the others. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them. And to everybody, take care in these times, and do not let injustice and madness reign over us. Take care, everybody. We'll see you in the spring. Last word, Emily.
I just want to thank everyone I just want to thank you so much for having me on. And it was so lovely to meet you last year. And it was one of the best parts of my summer. And I just appreciate having this opportunity, and am also wishing you the best. And I'm grateful for everyone here who's listening or has interest in these things. It's really encouraging that we can have these discussions, and it doesn't have to and it's so good to see your face and to be here with you today. And I'm gonna go
Great.
meditate.
Great to see your face. Also, I hope to see you again soon, one place or another.
You too, Catherine. Have a beautiful
You
day.
too.
Bye-bye.
You too, Emily. And to the audience, have a beautiful day. Even in this world, have a beautiful day.